Welcome to One More Thing. I'm Pastor Brett Watson. I'm here with Dr. Troy Doucet to talk about the dialogue that you and Dr. Bauckham had on stage yesterday.
Yes.
Talking about my favorite story, well, one of my favorite stories / topics
Yes.
that we find in the scripture, the book of Job. So I thought it was really great the way you guys gave some history of how this book likely made it into the canon and what the purpose that it served, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you just kind of give us a quick synopsis of that
It's
history?
it comes from either we think it's either a Mesopotamian or a Persian text from the 2nd or 3rd millennia BC, so 2,000 or 3,000 years before the Common Era, CE. And that original text was called The Servant and the Deity, or something like that, sort of loosely titled. And it follows the story of this man who is very affluent, and these deities, these gods, convene to put him through a trial in order to test his perseverance, his faithfulness. And Job mirrors that, much in the way like the Noah and the flood mirror the Epic of Gilgamesh, a much later text. And so not many people know that about Job. And so
the Epic of Gilgamesh is a much earlier text.
That's what I'm saying. It's an older text.
Yeah,
It's an older text than the Noah story. And so we see Noah as like Gilgamesh, right? And Job is this servant, an unnamed servant in one of these Mesopotamian texts.
Do you know if the names did the editors use Hebrew names there? I can't remember.
Yeah, so anytime, even with like Zophar and Elias, those are all Hebraic names that they just...
Okay, I thought so, but...
Yeah.
So in the servant and the deity story, Job is unnamed.
He's unnamed. He's just a servant.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I never looked at it.
Yeah, he's a servant. Pete Enns has a great podcast on it. He's got some Old Testament scholars that kind of talk about this, and they go way, way deeper than we do because it's more of an academic forum there. But yeah, and so it frames this sort of, which when you think about it, just part of the human situation, part of the human condition that has been universal throughout. That Rohr would call the patterns that are always true. Yeah. And the patterns that are always true are not always good,
That's right.
And this
at least not on the surface anyway.
That's right. And so that the idea of human suffering in light of there being supposedly a divine being who can put a stop to all this and doesn't. But yet there's some sort of endurance and patience and perseverance that's developed through the hardship. But it's really interesting. I mentioned it in the first sermon. I didn't mention it in in the second sermon. I didn't have enough time. But when you read like the story, Job is broken into 3 parts. You have that first part where everything is taken away from him after this council convenes to put him to the test. And you have this middle part where he's dealing with his wife and his friends, so-called
Just
friends.
curse God and die.
And then the end where Job is restored, And it's in that middle text. I think the verse is actually chapter 19, verse 17, where Job is covered in ashcloth and scraping himself. And his friends are like, "What are you doing, man?" And he goes, "My odor has become, displeasing to my wife and my children." And you kind of go, "Wait a minute.
I thought your kids
were dead."
Yeah.
Bro. And so that but that's not how the ancient mind worked. They weren't concerned about consistency and contradiction and storytelling. They were just there to tell a story.
Yeah. They were wisely concerned with conveying wisdom.
That's all it was. And so, so Job is, again, why do we suffer? Why do we suffer? Why do good people suffer? When the Deuteronomic understanding was, live a good life and you'll be blessed. Live a sinful life, you'll be cursed. And we don't see that play out, at least in any historical, documentation that we have. It seems like it rains in our life a lot. And and how do we deal with that? And so that's kind of where it went.
Yeah, great stuff. When we got into Suncoast in Depth, one of the group members said, I always ask them, so what stands out to you guys, and from the sermon? And one of the group members said, I'm just so relieved to find out that Job isn't an historical story, because if it was, then God is a jerk.
That's right.
But this is an important point that you guys made there, that these texts, many of them anyway, are not meant to be taken as historical fact.
Mm-hmm.
They are what some would call sacred myth, right?
Yeah.
They convey the patterns that are always true. And that's why they're so applicable to you and I, that now are separated from that particular text probably, 7,000, 10,000 years, But it is about the human condition and our struggle to understand this reality with God. And in the case of Ecclesiastes, he almost is like trying to struggle with it, with the idea that God isn't there.
That's right.
So the psalmist, so it's a really important text that they drew in. I wonder how some people take it, that it's not really, it doesn't even have its origins in the Hebrew culture.
Yeah, no, not at all.
But when they understand, like you said, the Noah story, pulls from another Mesopotamian story.
And so the creation story, Genesis 1. Yeah.
Genesis 1. In fact, you could argue that Genesis 1 is a correction of the thinking of surrounding cultures.
Yep.
That man is this kind of afterthought to clean up the mess of the gods.
That's right.
Where the Hebrew story says man is the pinnacle of God's creation.
That's right.
So some important differences, and all of those stories, though, are just have their own unique brilliance, I think. So in the story of Job, one of the things that I think is really brilliant there, especially if you subscribe to what many scholars think, that the closing of that story was added later, where he's restored
10 times or whatever.
Yeah, 9 times. Or whatever.
I don't want 10 times the children, man. Like, if you're gonna give me back what I had, that's cool. But 10 times,
yeah. This is really too much. No, really,
tremble
it's
at
too
that.
much. But even if you do include that restoration, which has its own merits, I think.
Yeah.
God never really gives a definitive answer for why he allows the suffering, right?
And get us in trouble, Brett.
Yeah, but think about it, though. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because what it does, it forces you to keep wrestling. Because you don't grow if you're not wrestling, right?
Yeah.
You got to wrestle with this stuff. Most of the stories in the biblical canon are designed that way.
That's right.
It's not to give answers for life. Does it establish principles? Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And they're great principles to live by. And in fact, the Deuteronomic view of suffering versus the Job view, each has their merits.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
The Deuteronomic view, it is true. If I live by certain principles, then I can kind of stack the deck in my favor.
That's right.
That's clear. If I don't make bad decisions, well, and there's a greater likelihood that I'm not going to suffer the consequences of bad decisions, right? But that's not a complete picture in and of itself. It's not enough to just wrestle with that. You got to wrestle with Job too.
Yep.
And so kudos to the editors.
For sure.
That drew that story in.
Yeah. And it's very interesting, because one of the conversations I had afterwards was, again, Hasatan, like the Satan, the adversary, the obstacle.
Yeah.
And you read these texts, and again, it always seems that this adversary always gets the best of God in some way. He gets the better of God. And even if you think the adversary is any way related to the serpent in the Genesis story and the cause of all this turmoil, like, who tells the truth in that story? God surely doesn't. Do you eat from this fruit, you're going to die, like cessation of existence. And it's the serpent who goes, no,
That's not really true.
That's not true. You won't die, but you'll become like the gods and deciding for yourself. And guess what happens? That becomes the fruition, the culmination of that sin. And so, it's super interesting when you're able to, again, I said it in the sermon, if you remove the restriction of your denominational or doctrinal or creedal stance on these stories, bro, you have a universe of possibilities in which not only to like interpret and apply, but I think it was Derrida, like Jacques Derrida talked about, like every text you should be able to play. You should have a certain amount of like linguistic or hermeneutical play to kind of, and that's the beauty of stories like Job. And for me, it's not so much that God's a jerk, like, one of the guys, the ladies in your class would say. I would agree with that. But it's also the fact that, man, this story, when you unbridle it from the limitations of your own thinking, then it's kind of like if Darwin were to see through a molecular microscope the cell, like he had a very limited view of the cell. If he looked at the cell now versus back then, he would see a universe inside one of the 33 trillion things that constitute my being. And that's beautiful, like it's beautiful. And that's what I think we're trying to do with the Bible is like, we have these, in our particular text, we have these 66 books that for millennia have been bound up through a particular kind of inner framing. And all we're trying to do is open the space for us to kind of see a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper, and see what might be revealed through it. And I think that was what, Dr. Bach and mine, what you and I do in our collaborations is how can we go, what else can we say about this text that reveals a pattern that is true in our lives, as opposed to what can we reveal in this text that validates our preconceived idea about what this text should say about our doctrine. Like,
and so much hermeneutic is done with that confirmation bias. And in fact, I mean, we're all human, so we're all guilty of it to one degree or another. But we really do try here to not fall prey to that.
That's right.
Confirmation bias. I think that this is an incredibly important story for some other reasons too. I don't think we have time to talk about it, in a one more thing, but it would be a good topic to tackle in like a longer format. So maybe if people show some interest in that, we'll do it. But great job, both of you. Did a fantastic job, even threw in a Trinity heresy.
That's right.
And I think it's important to say this, that this isn't all done. We're not opening the spaces to be rebellious heretics or anything. What we're trying to do is simply be honest.
That's right.
That's it.
That's it.
We're just trying to be honest.
Yep.
We don't claim to know it all.
No.
You guys have never done that on stage.
No.
And in fact, you don't even have to agree as you sit next to each other on the stage.
No.
But that is the unique beauty of this community.
Yeah.
That we don't have to agree. But that opens up the beautiful possibilities that come from dialogue.
That's right.
And so that's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to, get ourselves burned at the stake or anything like that.
No, but it would happen, man. So, but it was a great sort of, 2-week standalones. I mean, we were going to do another standalone, and then we said, no, let's just continue it. And there were many people like, you didn't use a Bible verse. No, we're just talking about Job itself, like the heartbeat of what this story is.
And we summarized the entire story. So if you want to read the Bible verses, go read it.
Go read it. That's right.
I dare you.
But this week, man, I'm excited. This week is Summer at the Movies, man.
Yes.
So this is something we started a couple of years ago, and man, it's taken off, and this creative team is leaning into it fully.
Each year's a little better than the last.
Wholeheartedly, man. So we've got a full array of things.
Not to mention popcorn and chocolate.
That's right.
Ooh, spoiler alert.
That's right. Be there. Bring a friend, man. It's going to be
there.
amazing.
All right.
Yeah, this week is Wonka, and you and I will be doing a video and some sort of voiceovers, but it's taste and see that God is good. So it'll be
I'm
awesome.
excited.
Awesome.
Thanks for what you do.
Thanks, brother.
Appreciate you.